The air in family court is usually thick with regret and broken promises, but today it was laced with pure poison. On one side sat Marcus Wells, a tech millionaire looking untouchable in a $1,000 suit. At his side, not a lawyer, but his mistress, Chloe Sterling, a smirk playing on her lips. They were a portrait of brazen victory. On the other side, an empty chair. The wife, Stella Wells, 7 months pregnant, and declared too emotionally fragile to appear. She would testify by video. Marcus thought he had it all planned. He thought he was in control. But he never imagined that the woman he'd dismissed as weak had prepared a digital bombshell, and her video testimony was about to shatter not just his case, but his entire world. The courtroom Department 4B of the Stanley Mosque Courthouse was an arena of quiet, expensive warfare. The air itself seemed sterile, smelling faintly of old paper and the bitter tang of dissolved marriages. Marcus Wells sat at the plaintiff's table, the very picture of aggrieved success. His suit was a deep charcoal grey, tailored to perfection, a silent testament to the wealth at the center of this ugly dispute. He radiated an aura of calm, controlled power, the kind of man who believed the world was simply a series of problems that his money and influence could solve. Beside him, in a move of breathtaking arrogance, sat Chloe Sterling. She wasn't his counsel. She was his statement. Dressed in a sharp emerald green dress that clung to her like a second skin, she was young, beautiful, and utterly unapologetic. She'd occasionally lean in to whisper something in Marcus's ear, her long blonde hair brushing against his shoulder. It was a performance of intimacy and possession, a deliberate cruelty aimed at an opponent who wasn't even physically present. They were a united front, projecting an image of a future untethered by the past. Across the aisle was Stella's lawyer, a weary but tenacious woman named Sarah Jenkins. The chair beside her was starkly, painfully empty. Sarah had argued for a continuance, citing the advanced stage of her client's high-risk pregnancy and the immense stress of the proceedings. The judge, a formidable woman named Judge Thompson, with a reputation for suffering no fools had compromised. Your client's presence is required, Ms. Jenkins. The court is not unsympathetic to her condition, but Mr. Wells has rights as well. She will appear via live video link. She will be sworn in. She will testify. And she will be cross-examined. Is that clear? And so a large television screen had been wheeled into place, facing the witness stand. For now it was dark, a black mirror reflecting the tense tableau. Marcus's lawyer, a slick, silver-haired predator named Julian Davies, rose to begin his opening statement. He spoke in smooth, reasonable tones, the kind that made outrageous claims sound like established facts. Your Honor. Davies began gesturing towards his client. We are here today because Mr. Marcus Wells, a pillar of the tech community and a generous philanthropist, has been subjected to a campaign of emotional and financial abuse by his wife, Stella Wells. A low murmur rippled through the few observers in the gallery. This was not the standard narrative. The picture Mrs. Wells will attempt to paint, Davies continued, is that of a victim, a scorned wife. And yes, Your Honor, my client does not deny his indiscretion. He has been open about his relationship with Ms. Sterling. He gave Chloe a brief, almost paternal nod. He is human. He made a mistake. But that mistake does not give Mrs. Wells license to liquidate their joint assets, to run up debts exceeding $250,000 in the last 6 months alone, and to engage in erratic, paranoid behavior that has given Mr. Wells serious cause for concern, not only for his own safety, but for the well-being of their unborn child. He let that hang in the air. The unborn child, the ultimate trump card. We will present evidence of exorbitant and inexplicable spending. Credit card statements showing thousands spent on luxury goods she has no use for. We will show emails and text messages filled with baseless delusional accusations. We will reluctantly be forced to call witnesses who will testify to Mrs. Wells's increasingly unstable mental state. Marcus looked down, shaking his head with a practiced sadness. It was a masterful performance. He was the reasonable man pushed to the brink by an unhinged woman. His affair was merely a symptom of a much larger problem, her. Sarah Jenkins objected, of course. "Your Honor, Mr. Davies is testifying. These are unsubstantiated and inflammatory claims designed to poison the well before my client has even had a chance to speak," noted Miss Jenkins. Judge Thompson said, her eyes fixed on Davies. "Tread carefully, Mr. Davies. Present your case, don't editorialize." "Of course, Your Honor." Davies gave a slight bow. For the next hour, he laid out his version of reality. He presented bank statements highlighting every large withdrawal Stella had made. He showed receipts for designer baby clothes, framing them not as a new mother's excitement, but as manic spending. He painted a picture of a marriage that had been crumbling long before Chloe Sterling ever entered it, a decay caused by Stella's alleged instability. Marcus was his star witness. When Davies called him to the stand, he walked with a heavy gait, a man burdened by sorrow. Wells Davies began. "Can you describe your wife's behavior in the months leading up to your separation?" Marcus sighed, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. "It was difficult," he said, his voice thick with faux emotion. Stella became distant, suspicious of everyone. She would accuse me of things, wild things, of spying on her, of trying to poison her. She would lock herself in her room for days. And the spending. I tried to talk to her about it, to get her help. I suggested therapy for us, for her. She refused. She saw it as an attack. And the child Davies asked, softly. "I'm terrified," Marcus confessed, looking directly at the judge. "I love my child. I want to be a father. But I have grave concerns about Stella's ability to provide a stable environment. That's all I want. A safe, stable home for my son." He didn't once look at the dark screen. To him, it was an irrelevance. His wife was a problem to be managed, and he was managing it with ruthless efficiency. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of carefully constructed lies, Davies rested his initial presentation. "The plaintiff rests for now, Your Honor." Judge Thompson looked from Marcus, the picture of pained sincerity, to the empty chair beside Sarah Jenkins. "Ms. Jenkins," the judge said, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "It is time to hear from your client. Let's get the video link established." A bailiff moved to the television. Marcus sat back down next to Chloe, giving her hand a confident squeeze under the table. He smirked. Phase 1 was complete. He had framed the narrative. Now his unstable, emotional, pregnant wife would get on screen, likely break down in tears and prove his every point. He thought he knew exactly what was coming. The bailiff fiddled with a cable, and the screen flickered. A blue background appeared, then dissolved into a live image. But it wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't a close-up of a tear-streaked face in a dimly lit bedroom. The video showed Stella Wells, yes, but she was seated upright at a simple wooden desk. Her pregnancy was obvious, a gentle curve beneath a plain grey sweater. Her face was pale, but her expression was one of profound, unnerving calm. Her eyes, clear and direct, seemed to look right through the screen, past the lawyers and the judge, and straight at her husband. The background was not a bedroom, but a neutral wall, a blank canvas. She looked composed, prepared, and utterly in control. The quiet confidence radiating from the screen was the first crack in Marcus's perfect facade. He shifted in his seat, his smirk tightening into a thin, uncertain line. Chloe's hand, which had been resting casually on his arm, tensed. "Mrs. Wells." "Can you hear me?" Judge Thompson's voice boomed. On screen, Stella leaned slightly towards her microphone. "Yes, Your Honor. I can hear you perfectly." Her voice was not the hysterical shriek Marcus had been counting on. It was steady. It was clear. It was the voice of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. "Please raise your right hand," the bailiff instructed. She complied, her gaze never wavering from the camera. She was sworn in. Sarah Jenkins rose. "Mrs. Wells," she began gently. "You have heard the testimony of your husband. You have heard the accusations he and his counsel have made against you. How do you respond?" Stella took a slow, deliberate breath. She looked at her husband, a man she had once loved, a man she had built a life with. She saw the smugness, the deceit, the utter lack of remorse. "I respond," Stella said, her voice ringing with a sudden steely strength that made Marcus flinch by saying that my husband is a very, very good storyteller. But I have a story of my own, and unlike his, mine has evidence. She reached for her mouse. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like to share my screen. I have prepared a presentation, a video testimony." Judge Thompson raised an eyebrow. "A presentation?" "Yes, Your Honor. A timeline. I believe it will clarify a great many things." Marcus's lawyer was on his feet instantly. "Objection. Your Honor, this is an ambush. We have no prior knowledge of any presentation. We don't know what this material contains. It's a transparent attempt to introduce inadmissible evidence," Sarah Jenkins countered smoothly. "Your Honor, my client is the witness. Her testimony is the evidence. She has simply chosen to organize her testimony in a visual format for the sake of clarity and efficiency. Everything she is about to present is her own sworn testimony. If Mr. Davies wishes to cross-examine her on it, he is more than welcome." Judge Thompson considered this for a moment, her eyes darting between the frantic lawyer and the unnervingly calm woman on the screen. "I'll allow it," she declared, her voice firm. "But be warned, Mrs. Wells, this is a court of law, not a movie theater. Proceed." Marcus's blood ran cold. A presentation. A timeline. This wasn't in the script. His plan, so meticulous and controlled, was suddenly veering off-road. He stared at the screen at the face of the woman he thought he had broken, and for the first time that day, he felt a sliver of genuine fear. On the screen, Stella gave a small, sad smile. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said. "I'm ready." And with a click of her mouse, the screen changed. The image of her face was replaced by a title card, written in simple, elegant font against a black background. It read, "The Wells Project, a timeline of deceit." Chloe Sterling let out a small, involuntary gasp. Marcus Wells felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't a defense, Ors. This was an execution. Before the courtroom and the calculated lies, there was love. Or at least what Stella had believed was love. It felt important to start there. Her video presentation didn't begin with anger. It began with a photograph. It was a slightly grainy selfie taken 10 years prior. A younger Marcus, his hair unruly, a wide, uninhibited grin on his face. A younger Stella, her head on his shoulder, her eyes bright with adoration. They were in a cramped, messy apartment, the walls bare except for a framed poster for a vintage sci-fi movie. This was us. Stella's voice narrated calm and even a stark contrast to the warmth of the image. 10 years ago, we had nothing but a shared dream. Marcus had the idea for a new data compression algorithm, and I had a small inheritance from my grandmother. I was a graphic designer just starting out. I believed in him. The screen shifted. It showed a scanned image of a bank transfer slip. A withdrawal of $50,000 from an account in the name of Stella Miller, her maiden name, and a deposit of the same amount into a newly formed corporate account, Wells Innovations, LLC. I gave him everything I had. Her voice continued. Not as a loan, but as a partner. I designed the first logo. I built the first website. I sat with him through 100 all-nighters as he wrote the code, making coffee and debugging his user interface. We were a team. More photos flashed across the screen. A small sparse office with 2 desks. Marcus asleep on a beanbag chair. Stella painting the logo on their new office door. A cheap bottle of champagne being popped the day they secured their first round of seed funding. They were intimate, happy moments, each one now a dagger twisting in the gut. Marcus watched his hands clenched into fists on the table. He could feel Chloe shifting uncomfortably beside him. He remembered those days. He had buried them, dismissed them as a necessary, inconvenient prelude to his success. Seeing them now weaponized against him felt like a violation. For 5 years we built the company together, Stella narrated. Then success came, real success, the kind that changes people. The images changed too. The cramped apartment was replaced by a sprawling minimalist mansion with floor-to-ceiling windows. The beat-up sedan was replaced by a series of gleaming luxury cars. The photos became more posed, less candid. Parties on yachts, red carpet events, magazine covers featuring Marcus as the new face of tech. Stella was often in the photos, but she looked increasingly like an accessory, a beautiful but silent partner. The more money we made, Stella said, her voice tinged with the first hint of coldness, the more Marcus changed. The shared dream became his dream. Our success became his success. We became I. She put up a slide with a series of text message screenshots. Marcus closing the Series B funding. Huge day for me. Marcus just landed the keynote at TechCrunch. Can't believe how far I've come. Marcus. The Forbes profile just dropped. They're calling me a visionary. I was so proud of him, Stella said softly. But I was also being slowly, methodically erased. From the company's official history, from the narrative he told the world, and eventually from his life. The screen faded to black. When it came back, it showed a calendar. A date was circled in red, October 17th of the previous year. This was our 8th wedding anniversary, Stella stated. Marcus told me he had to fly to Singapore for an emergency board meeting. He was so sorry, so apologetic. He sent 24 white roses to the house, The next image was a screenshot of an Instagram post. It was from Chloe Sterling's public profile. Chloe in a bikini clinking champagne glasses with someone just out of frame on a beach. The caption read, "Paradise with my man. Cabo. Anniversary." Surprise. The geotag was Cabo San Lucas. The date stamp was October 17th. A low gasp went through the courtroom. Davies Marcus's lawyer looked at his client with a flash of fury. This was not the simple acknowledged indiscretion he had been led to believe. This was a deep, calculated deception. "I didn't see this post until months later," Stella explained. "At the time, I just felt lonely, but that was the night things began to unravel. He came home from his Singapore trip, and he was different, colder, more secretive with his phone. He started working later. He smelled of a perfume I didn't wear." The next slide was titled "The Red Flags." It was a meticulous catalogue of deceit. Phone logs showing late-night calls to a number she didn't recognize. Credit card statements with charges for jewelry. She never received dinners at restaurants he never took her to. "He started talking about our finances," Stella said. "He told me the company was facing a cash flow problem, that we needed to be careful. He insisted we change our joint accounts, giving him sole signing authority for efficiency's sake. He said it was to protect me so I wouldn't have to worry about it." She put up a scanned document, a legal form signed by both of them giving Marcus control over their primary investment portfolio. Stella's signature was clear. "He told me it was a formality," she said. "He told me he was protecting our future, our family. I was pregnant. I was tired. I trusted him." Marcus squirmed. This was his narrative twisted and turned back on him. Yes, he'd done all that. But it was for a reason. To secure his assets before divorcing the woman who was becoming a liability. Hearing it laid out so plainly, so clinically, made it sound monstrous. The spending, Stella went on addressing the accusation from Davies directly. "Mr. Davies claims I went on a spending spree. He's right. I did. Let me show you what I bought." The screen showed a series of receipts, not for designer clothes or handbags. One was for $15,000, the payee Blackthorn Digital Forensics. Another for $25,000, the payee J.D. Harding and Associates Private Investigations. Another for $10,000, payee Secure Com Technologies. I wasn't buying shoes. "Your Honor," Stella said, her voice sharp as glass. "I was buying an education. I was buying the truth. Because I knew deep down that my husband was not just cheating on me. He was trying to erase me. And I needed to know why." The final image of this section appeared on the screen. It was a still frame from a security camera, grainy and dark. It showed the front door of their home. Marcus was standing there, embracing Chloe, kissing her deeply before she got into her car. The timestamp in the corner showed it was 6:15 a.m., just hours before he would come into the bedroom, kiss a sleeping Stella on the forehead, and tell her he was heading to the office for an early start. He wasn't just having an affair. Stella's voice trembled with suppressed rage. He was living a completely separate life, funded by our shared wealth, while systematically stripping me of any access to it. He told me we were broke while he was buying her a new convertible. He told me I was paranoid while he was bringing her to our home. He told me I was unstable because he needed me to be. She paused, letting the weight of her words fill the silent courtroom. He didn't just break my heart. He tried to break my mind. He wanted me to seem crazy so that when this day came, Nobody would believe me. He underestimated me. He forgot who I was before I was Mrs. Wells. He forgot that I was the one who helped him build the damn thing, and I knew from the very beginning where all the bodies were buried. The screen faded to black once more, ending the second part of her testimony. The mood in the courtroom had shifted irrevocably. The image of the pained, reasonable husband had been shattered. In its place was a cold, calculating predator. Marcus Wells was no longer looking at the screen. He was staring at his lawyer, his face pale with fury and panic. The trap he had so carefully laid for his wife had just sprung shut on him instead. And the worst part was, he knew the most damning evidence was yet to come. The discovery of the affair was a gut-wrenching blow, but for Stella, it quickly morphed from heartbreak into a chilling premonition. The calculated nature of the deception, the lies about their finances, the subtle gaslighting, it all pointed to something far more sinister than simple infidelity. Marcus wasn't just leaving her. He was planning to annihilate her. The realization came one sleepless night, the blue glow of her phone illuminating tears on her cheeks as she scrolled through Chloe's vapid social media. It wasn't sadness she felt anymore. It was a cold, hard clarity. Grief was a luxury she couldn't afford. Resolve was a necessity. This was the core of the third part of her video testimony, which she titled The Investigation. When you've spent a decade with a man like Marcus Stella's voice narrated over a black screen, you learn his habits, his passwords, his blind spots. His greatest weakness has always been his arrogance. He believes he is smarter than everyone else in the room. He never imagines that the people he dismisses his assistant, the IT guy, his wife, are paying attention. The screen lit up with a complex diagram, a flowchart of the Wells' home network. It showed laptops, phones, smart TVs, and at the center of it all, a high-end server that Marcus used for personal projects and data backups. "This is our home network," she explained. Marcus designed it himself. He was proud of it. He called it Fort Knox. He even walked me through the security protocols years ago, wanting to show off. He explained how the main server created a mirrored encrypted backup of every device connected to it every 24 hours. A perfect digital snapshot. His phone, my phone, his laptop, everything. A red circle appeared on the diagram, highlighting a specific port on the server. He also showed me the back door he'd built for himself, a maintenance port for remote access in case the main system ever failed. He was so proud of it, he wrote the access key down on a post-it note and stuck it to the bottom of his desk drawer. He told me it was security through obscurity. I told him it was hubris. The next image was a close-up photo of that very post-it note, a string of 16 alphanumeric characters. Marcus's face went ashen. He remembered that conversation. He had been condescending, explaining the complex system to his non-technical wife. He never imagined she actually understood it. He certainly never imagined she would ever use it. For 6 months, Stella continued her voice steady. Despite the memory, I lived a double life. During the day, I was the sad, pregnant wife, playing the part he expected. I went to my doctor's appointments. I decorated the nursery. I let him see me cry. But at night, when he was working late, or on one of his business trips, I was hunting. The screen showed a screen recording of a desktop. The audience watched as Stella's cursor expertly navigated through a complex file system. It was a mirror image of Marcus's laptop. She opened a folder labeled iMessage Archives. He was smart enough to delete incriminating texts from his phone, she explained. But he forgot about the server. The server backed up everything instantly. A torrent of text messages between Marcus and Chloe filled the screen. Chloe Ellie called. So hard, pretending to be her friend and listening to her whine about you working so much. Marcus. You're a trooper. Almost there. Davies is drafting the initial petition. The narrative is key. We have to establish a pattern of instability. Chloe. Did you transfer the funds to the Cayman account Marcus done? Phase 1 of the asset shield is complete. She won't see a dime of the Omnicorp payout. Chloe. She asked me about the baby shower. The irony is sickeningly delicious. Marcus. Just play along. The more you're in her life, the crazier she'll look when she finally accuses you. It's perfect. Sarah Jenkins. Stella's lawyer had to steady herself on her lectern. This was beyond anything she had imagined. This wasn't just an affair. It was a conspiracy. A premeditated, malicious plot to defraud a pregnant woman and paint her as insane. Julian Davies Marcus's lawyer looked as though he'd been struck by lightning. He was named. He was implicated in building a false narrative. His carefully crafted image of a respectable officer of the court was being incinerated in real time. He stared at his client with a look of pure betrayal. But Stella was not done. The digital trail was damning, she said. But I knew I needed more. I needed them in their own words without the filter of a keyboard. I needed to prove the full scope of their plan. That's when I bought the services of Secure Comm Technologies. The screen showed an invoice for 3 high-fidelity audio-video smoke detectors. Our home has a lot of blind spots, Stella explained. I hired a technician under the guise of upgrading our fire safety system before the baby arrived. I paid him handsomely in cash to install 3 special smoke detectors, 1 in the master bedroom, 1 in the kitchen, and 1 in Marcus's home office. A collective audible gasp filled the courtroom. This was the moment everything tilted. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been inverted with bone-jarring force. For the next 3 months I listened, Stella said, and for the first time her voice cracked with a raw, visceral pain. I listened to my husband and his mistress in my home, in my bed, planning my destruction. I listened to them mock me. I listened to them laugh about how they were going to leave me with nothing, how they would fight for custody and prove I was an unfit mother. I had to force myself to eat for the baby. I had to stop myself from screaming. Every night I would download the recordings, label them and save them. I lived on chamomile tea and sheer, unadulterated rage. She took a deep breath, composing herself. The momentary crack in her armor only made her resolve seem more formidable. I have over 200 hours of audio and video recordings, she stated, her voice returning to its icy calm. But I believe for the purposes of this hearing, the court only needs to see 1. A conversation they had 2 weeks ago in Marcus's office. They were celebrating. The final slide of this section appeared. It was a still image, a video thumbnail showing Marcus and Chloe on the leather couch in his office. They were holding champagne glasses, smiling, looking triumphant. The title below the image read, Exhibit A, The Victory Lap. They believed they had already won. Stella said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. They thought their plan was perfect. They were about to file for divorce. They were discussing their future. And they were discussing a secret much, much bigger than me, or the affair, or the money. She looked directly into the camera lens as if staring into her husband's soul. They were talking about why the money had to be hidden so desperately. They were talking about the criminal fraud at Wells Innovations. The word fraud hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus Wells shot up from his chair. Lies, he roared, his face purple with rage and terror. She's insane. This is illegal. You can't record someone in their own home. Chloe looked like a ghost, her face a mask of frozen panic. Judge Thompson slammed her gavel down, the sound cracking like a rifle shot through the courtroom. Mr. Wells, sit down. Sit down now, or I will have you removed and held in contempt. Marcus, trembling slowly, sank back into his chair, his eyes wide with a primal fear. He was no longer a master of the universe. He was an animal in a trap, and he was just beginning to realize the jaws had closed. Ms. Jenkins. The judge said, her voice dangerously low, turning her attention back to the screen. A word of caution. Your client is making an extremely serious allegation, and she has just admitted to potentially violating wiretapping laws. Sarah Jenkins was ready. Your Honor, under California law, it is illegal to record a confidential communication. However, the law does not protect conversations that can be reasonably overheard. These recordings were made in common areas of the shared marital home. More importantly, the law makes exceptions for recording conversations to obtain evidence of a felony, such as kidnapping or extortion. We will argue that a conspiracy to fraudulently divest a spouse of her rightful assets and to use the legal system to declare her mentally unfit to take custody of her child rises to the level of criminal conspiracy and extortion. But for now, that is a matter for another day. For this hearing, what matters is the truth. I suggest we hear it. Judge Thompson stared at the screen for a long, silent moment. The entire courtroom held its breath. Then she gave a single, sharp nod. Mrs. Wells, she said, play the video. With the judge's command, Stella clicked the play button. The still image of Marcus and Chloe on the couch came to life. The audio was crystal clear, a testament to the expensive equipment Stella had purchased. The video opened with the clink of crystal glasses. Marcus and Chloe were beaming. To us, Marcus said, his voice smooth and triumphant. To the new beginning. Phase 1 complete. I can't believe how easy it was, Chloe said, taking a sip of champagne. She kicked off her heels and curled her legs up onto the couch. She signed everything. No questions asked. Of course she did. Marcus scoffed, leaning back. She's too busy picking out nursery colors and feeling sorry for herself to look at the fine print. She trusts me. Pathetic, really. In the courtroom, every eye was glued to the screen. Marcus himself seemed hypnotized, watching his own downfall with a horrified fascination. Chloe had her hands over her face, her carefully constructed composure utterly demolished. On screen, Chloe traced the rim of her glass. Are you sure Davies has the narrative locked down? The unstable angle. Locked and loaded. Marcus confirmed with a smug grin. He's got the credit card statements, the witnesses from the club who saw her looking distraught. By the time we get to court, she'll look like a hysterical, paranoid wreck. We'll offer her a settlement so low, she'll have to take it. And custody. A judge will take one look at our evidence and her emotional state and see that the child is better off with a stable, successful father. And his loving new partner, Chloe, added leaning in to kiss him. The casual cruelty of it was stunning. They weren't just discussing legal strategy. They were reveling in their own malice. Judge Thompson's face was a stony mask, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her pen. Then the conversation shifted. As soon as the divorce is finalized and her name is off, everything we can move on the acquisition, Marcus said, his tone becoming more serious, more businesslike. Is it still safe? Chloe asked, a flicker of genuine concern in her voice. The numbers, the ones you cooked for the Series C funding round, if anyone looks too closely before the Omnicorp deal goes through. Marcus waved a dismissive hand. Nobody is looking. The auditors signed off. They see what I want them to see. That's what a $20,000 a month consulting fee buys you. Plausible deniability. He stood up and walked over to his desk, picking up a framed photo. It was his and Stella's wedding picture. He stared at it for a moment. The real genius of this, he said, a cold smile playing on his lips, is that the divorce is the perfect cover. If any financial irregularities ever do come to light, down the road, my first defense will be, it was a messy divorce. My unstable wife was trying to ruin me. She must have messed with the books. It's airtight. Julian Davies, Marcus's lawyer, physically recoiled. He was being named as a pawn in a scheme to commit securities fraud. His career was flashing before his eyes. He slowly began pushing his chair back from the table, trying to create physical distance from Marcus, as if the man were radioactive. Chloe on screen laughed. A sharp, ugly sound. You really are a bastard, Marcus Wells. I'm a survivor, he corrected her, placing the photo face down on his desk with a soft thud. And the only thing that matters is winning. We needed to liquidate my position in Wells Innovations without spooking the market or Omnicorp's due diligence team, hiding the assets in offshore accounts under the guise of protecting them from a spendthrift wife is the only way. It's brilliant. And Stella? Chloe asked. Marcus shrugged, walking back to the couch. What about her? She gets a pittance, enough to keep her from being a nuisance. She'll be a single mom with a history of mental instability. Who's going to believe any story she tries to tell? She'll be nobody. And we, he said, taking Chloe's chin in his hand, will be in Monaco. He leaned in to kiss her again, and as he did, Stella paused the video. The image of their triumphant, treacherous kiss was frozen on the giant screen. Silence. A profound, absolute silence descended upon the courtroom. It was heavier than any sound, filled with the weight of shattered lies and exposed corruption. It was the silence of a detonation's immediate aftermath, before the screams and the sirens begin. Marcus Wells was a statue of pure terror. The blood had drained from his face, leaving a sickly, waxy pallor. His mouth was slightly agape, his eyes fixed on the frozen image of his own perfidy. He looked like a man who had just witnessed his own ghost. Chloe Sterling was openly sobbing now. Not quiet tears, but ragged, heaving gasps of someone whose entire world has just been pulled out from under them. Julian Davies, the silver-haired predator, looked like a broken old man. He slowly removed his glasses, polished them with a trembling hand, and placed them on the table. He would not be putting them back on. He was done. He looked over at Sarah Jenkins with an expression of utter defeat. Sarah, for her part, remained professional. But a single tear traced a path down her cheek, a tear of relief, of vindication, of awe at her client's courage. But all eyes eventually turned to Judge Thompson. She sat motionless for a full 30 seconds, her gaze flicking from the screen to Marcus, to Chloe, to the lawyers, and back to the screen. Her expression was unreadable, carved from granite. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but it carried an authority that seemed to shake the very foundations of the room. "Wells," she said, her eyes still locked on the frozen video. "Thank you. You may stop sharing your screen now." Stella complied. Her face, calm and composed, reappeared on the television. She had done it. She had survived the fire and brought back proof of the arsonists. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a profound, weary sadness. Judge Thompson turned her gaze upon Marcus Wells. It was not a look of anger. It was a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Mr. Wells," she said, her voice dripping with ice, "your charade is over." She then turned to the bailiff. "Bailiff, please escort Miss Sterling out of my courtroom. Her presence here is no longer appropriate. In fact, it is an offense to this court's dignity." Chloe didn't need to be escorted. She scrambled out of her chair, tripping over her own feet as she fled the room, in a state of utter disgrace, her sobs echoing in the hallway. The judge wasn't finished. "Mr. Davies," she said, her voice hardening. "You have approximately 10 seconds to explain to me why I shouldn't file a report with the state bar for suborning perjury and attempting to perpetrate a fraud upon this court." Davies stood, his face ashen. "Your Honor, I was not aware. I was misled by my client. That the judge cut him off is a conversation you will have with them. For now, consider your involvement in this case terminated. You are dismissed." Davies gathered his briefcase with clumsy, fumbling hands and all but ran from the courtroom, not daring to look back. Now it was just Marcus, alone at the plaintiff's table. A king suddenly stripped of his kingdom, his courtiers, his clothes. He looked small, pathetic, and utterly broken. Judge Thompson looked at the court stenographer. "Let the record show," she began, her voice ringing with judicial fury, "that this court has just been presented with compelling prima facie evidence of a conspiracy to commit perjury, willful concealment of assets, and what appears to be a confession to securities fraud and money laundering." She picked up her phone. "Bailiff, get me the chief clerk on the line. And have someone from the district attorney's office and the U.S. attorney's office meet me in my chambers. Immediately." She put the phone down and fixed her final damning glare on Marcus. "Mr. Wells, your divorce petition is dismissed with extreme prejudice. All motions you have filed are denied. This hearing is concluded." She slammed the gavel down, the sound a final definitive crack of doom. "And I would strongly advise you not to leave the state of California." The slam of Judge Thompson's gavel was not just a sound. It was a fracture in reality. For Marcus Wells, the world compressed into a roaring tunnel of silence. The polished wood of the plaintiff's table felt cold and alien under his clammy palms. His vision blurred the faces in the small gallery, twisting into grotesque masks of shock and fascination. He saw a smartphone raised its dark lens, a malevolent eye capturing his utter ruin. The name he had spent a lifetime building into a monument of success had been reduced to rubble in less than an hour. Two bailiff's men, with impassive faces and shoulders as wide as the courthouse doors, moved with practiced calm to stand behind his chair. They didn't touch him, but their proximity was a keg of invisible steel. He was no longer a tech mogul, a plaintiff, a man of influence. He was a flight risk, a cornered animal. The air, once thick with his own arrogance, was now thin and unbreathable, choked with the dust of his collapsed empire. He finally understood the expression, "the walls are closing in." They were the cold marble walls of a legal tomb he had dug for himself. In the chaotic days that followed, the consequences rained down, not like a storm, but like a biblical flood. Judge Thompson having referred the criminal matters to the federal authorities, wielded her judicial power over the divorce with the precision of a surgeon. In an emergency hearing, Marcus was forced to attend with a hastily appointed public defender. She dismantled his life piece by piece. First came the restraining order, its language cold and absolute, creating a legal chasm between him and Stella, and more importantly, the home he still considered his. Then came the asset freeze. It was devastatingly thorough. A team of forensic accountants, now armed with the map Stella had provided, worked with federal marshals to lock down everything. The Cayman accounts, the shadowy LLCs, the secret portfolio meant to fund his new life with Chloe, all of it was seized. The Omnicorp acquisition. The deal that was to be his crowning achievement evaporated overnight, its board citing a catastrophic failure of character and fiduciary duty in a press release that was mercilessly direct. The division of property was the final brutal act of severance. Citing Marcus's profound and malicious conspiracy to commit fraud against his spouse and the court, the judge made a ruling that was both a restitution and a punishment. The sprawling, minimalist mansion, the place he saw as a temple to his success, was awarded solely to Stella. It was no longer his sanctuary. It was the spoils of a war he had lost. Of what remained of their legitimate wealth, the judge carved it with a blade of pure justice. 75% was granted to Stella, a sum meant to secure her future and that of her child. The final 25% was placed into an ironclad trust for the baby, naming Stella as guardian, but managed by a third-party bank, ensuring Marcus could never touch it. When the accounting was done, Marcus Wells, the man who had graced the cover of business magazines, was left with a single checking account containing less than $5,000, a wardrobe of expensive suits that now felt like a costume, and a legal bill that stretched into the stratosphere. His life devolved into a series of beige, soulless rooms, the grim offices of overworked criminal defense lawyers who spoke in flat, pessimistic tones. They didn't see a visionary. They saw a desperate client with a high-profile case and no money. He'd see his own haggard face on the news, the triumphant video of his confession playing on a loop. He was no longer a person, but a spectacle of disgrace. The cruelest cut came when his new lawyer informed him with a distinct lack of sympathy that Chloe Sterling had been granted immunity in exchange for her full cooperation. The woman he had planned a future with was now the star witness for his prosecution, her betrayal, as complete and calculated as his own had been. 6 months passed. Autumn bled into winter, and winter thawed into a tentative spring. Inside the house, that was now a fortress of peace, Stella Wells had systematically erased the last vestiges of her husband. She had repainted his office a soft, warm cream. His clothes were donated his accolades, and photographs packed into boxes and relegated to a distant storage unit. She found a surprising solace in physical labor, spending hours in the garden, pulling up weeds and planting new life hydrangeas, lavender, and a small vegetable patch. With each weed pulled, it felt like she was uprooting a painful memory. With each new bloom, she was cultivating her own future. The house was no longer silent and tense. It was filled with the gentle gurgling sounds of her daughter Lily. Born in the quiet moments of a January dawn, Lily was her anchor to the new world she had built. She was a tiny, perfect creature of pure innocence, untainted by the sordid drama that had preceded her arrival. Rocking her to sleep, in the dead of night, Stella would look down at her daughter's face and feel a love so fierce and protective it eclipsed all the pain that had come before. This was what she had been fighting for. One bright April afternoon, Sarah Jenkins came to visit. The two women had forged a bond that transcended attorney and client. They sat in the sun-drenched kitchen, sipping tea, the air filled with the scent of freshly baked bread. Sarah slid a plain manila envelope across the polished kitchen island. "It's official," she said, her voice gentle. Stella looked at the envelope, but didn't reach for it. She met her friend's gaze. He took the deal. Sarah nodded. He took the plea. His lawyers knew he stood no chance at trial. "Your evidence was a nuke, Stella. He's pleading guilty to 1 count of wire fraud and 1 of securities fraud. The U.S. Attorney is recommending a sentence of 12 years in a federal correctional facility. With good behavior, he'll be out in 8 years." The number hung in the air. Stella thought of Lily, who would be in elementary school by then. She felt a strange, hollow ache. It wasn't triumph. The time for that had passed. It was the heavy, somber finality of closure. A door was not just being closed, but being bricked over, sealed forever. "And Chloe," Stella asked, her voice barely a whisper, "testified against him at the grand jury hearing." Sarah said, a note of distaste in her tone. In exchange, she pleaded to a lesser conspiracy charge. She got 5 years probation and a fine that will wipe out whatever savings she had. Her name is poison in every circle she ever tried to enter. In a way, her sentence is a life of her own making. Stella nodded, taking a slow sip of her tea. She looked through the window at the garden, at the green shoots pushing their way through the dark soil. She had been through the fire, dragged through the darkest parts of another person's soul. But she had not been consumed. She had been forged. "Thank you, Sarah," Stella said, her voice filled with a profound, quiet gratitude. "For everything. For believing me when I could barely believe myself." Sarah reached across the table and placed her hand over Stella's. "Stella, I just held the flashlight. You were the one who navigated the maze and slayed the monster. You're the strongest person I've ever had the honor to represent." Later that evening, after Sarah had gone, Stella stood by the large window in the living room, holding Lily close. Her daughter was asleep, her small body warm and heavy against her mother's chest. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and violet. She thought of the man who was Lily's biological father, a man who would exist for her daughter only as a cautionary tale, a faded photograph in a sealed box. She felt a pang of pity. Not for the man who was heading to prison, but for the man she had once loved. The man who had lost his way so completely that he tried to destroy everything good in his life. She had survived him. More than that, she had prevailed. She had lost a husband, a partnership, and a life she realized had been built on lies. But in the ashes, she had found her own unshakable strength. She had found her voice, and she had her daughter. She held Lily a little tighter, her lips brushing the soft fuzz of her hair. "It's just you and me, little one," she whispered into the quiet of the room. "And we are going to build a beautiful world just for us." The last rays of sunlight streamed through the clean glass, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny golden promises of 1,000 peaceful tomorrows. The storm had passed. The wreckage had been cleared. This was the dawn. The story of Stella Wells is a harrowing reminder that sometimes the deepest betrayals come from the people we trust the most. It's a story of greed and arrogance, but ultimately it's a powerful testament to resilience, intelligence, and the unbreakable strength of a mother fighting for her child. Stella was dismissed, underestimated, and targeted, but she refused to be a victim. She used her pain as fuel and her knowledge as a weapon, proving that the truth, when meticulously armed, is the most powerful force for justice there is. Her victory wasn't just in a courtroom. It was in reclaiming her life, her peace, and her future. If this story of resilience and ultimate justice moved you, please let us know by smashing that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner strength. And for more true-life dramas that will leave you breathless, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Thank you for listening.